The Sabbat, an infamous vampiric sect renowned for their monstrosity, feared for their zeal, and made taboo for their horrific acts, often committed in plain sight. Their presence is carried through the timid whispers of paranoid kindred who would rather see the eviscerating rays of the sun than meet the grisly fate that waits at the end of their fangs. Many tales are spun with them as the blood-curdling headline. Tales which spin their war against the antediluvians into a horror story which ends with a world dominated by vampires. Yet these are tales which often confuse what the Sabbat truly are, both to kindred outside of the faction and even those who are deeply ingrained within it. To say the Sabbat represents a faction which all share a mutual goal is somewhat misguided. Whilst any Sabbat archbishop would rejoice if the bloodthirsty pacts under their heel would heed their beck and call, loyalty within the Sabbat varies wildly. Many would gladly throw themselves into the fire for their sect, whereas others seek to manipulate the revolutionary nature of their faction to benefit their own goals. In the world of darkness, the Sabbat are as fractured as they are united, both communally fearing the looming threat of Gehenna, but each taking different routes to combat those the sect deems as worthy of destruction. The Sabbat has many enemies, and most deem those openly tied to the sect as depraved and indoctrinated at best. Their internal fractures are only mended by a strict series of codes and rituals, which attempt to fuse the bestial nature of the vampire within to the goals of the sect at large. To join the Sabbat, if you're even lucky enough to be given a choice in the first place, is a path laden with blood and sacrifice. Yet the Sword of Caine falls as it pleases, and as Gehenna draws ever closer, perhaps these so-called vampiric fanatics are the ones you should lend your colors to. Because to be a member of the Sabbat, it is to be something far more than just human. Tonight, we will be delving further into the sect of the Sabbat, uncovering their revolutionary history, their ecclesiastical hierarchy, and fearsome identity, all in the pursuit to ask the question, who are the Sabbat, and how do they seek to rule the world of darkness? But first, if you enjoy grim tales from dark universes or want to know more about the world of darkness, perhaps leave a like or even subscribe, as it helps the channel immensely. War and the Sabbat from the outset are synonymous with each other. A vast majority of the sect are open to the fact that conflict is perhaps the most sought-after path for any would-be Sabbat member. As such, their pursuits to wage wars inevitably target a wide range of would-be adversaries. They are engaged in fighting not only rival vampiric sects such as the Camarilla, the Anarchs, and the elusive Inconnu, but they have also sworn to battle the forces of the werewolves, the witch hunters, and humanity at large. Whilst in modern nights, this crusade is often fought in vain, the inception of the Sabbat's pursuit to overturn the tides of not only vampiric society but the world's governance was done so in the same manner of a revolution. A revolt, you could say. Claims the Sabbat existed before the Anarch Revolt within the 15th century are far and few between. Some claim there were pacts of Sabbat-aligned kindred, which used to wreak havoc across what was known as the Old World. Other Elder Sabbat members state that the faction had their roots within the literal occult definition of the word, a meeting of witches and like-minded deviants who would convene to worship and give servitude to the forces of hell. However, these claims are loose in comparison to the events recorded in vampiric history, which truly gave way to the prominence of the sect. This all began with the death of two ancient vampires, the antediluvians of the La Sombra and the Tzimisce clans. The accounts of these fates will be in summary tonight, yet if you're interested in learning about the grittier details of these dark happenings, please feel free to peruse our videos here, which detail all about the La Sombra clan and the Tzimisce. The two first nails in the coffin came from two revolutionary vampires, Gratiano de Veronese of the La Sombra and Glugoj the Bloodbreaker. hailing from the Tzimisce. Both were steadfast in their beliefs that the manipulations of younger vampires through the vitae flowing through their veins was an evil act committed by these ancient clan progenitors. And thus, Gratiano, hoping to topple the powers that be, struck the first nail with an army of like-minded Cainites and attacked the Castle of Shadows, the haven of the La Sombra antediluvian. Successful in his assault, Gratiano supposedly diablerized the ancient vampire, draining its soul and imbuing himself with its arcane power. Gratiano had gave way to a period in vampiric history which would go down as one of the bloodiest that was ever known. Though as Gratiano slipped into the shadows, the fiends of Clan Tzimisce caught on to this news, which travelled fast through the covens and chambers of vampiric society. Within the late 14th century, after a period of toppling elders across the Tzimisce ancestral lands, Lugoj finally received the location of the eldest. With his own band of anarchs, Lugoj fought through the waves of Slata and loyal Cainites to the Tzimisce antediluvian, who protected Cernog Monastery. Lugoj, a known Diablerist, empowered by the vitae of Bielebog, whom he drained during the Anarch Revolt, sought to do the same for the soul of his clan leader. Yet the events which followed are murky to say the least. For the sake of brevity, Lugoj appeared to be the victor, with the Anarchs celebrating yet another victory over the Elder Cainites, even if the shadow of the eldest still lurked just out of view. With these victorious Anarchs emboldened by their acts of pure savagery, they took to spreading their revolutionary ideals across vampiric strongholds around Europe. Claiming themselves to be anti-tribu, or against the core tenets of their clan, they felt free to travel the lands, spreading a great patricide which would topple the populations of elder vampires. Many kindred joined this cause, and put every vampire they deemed corrupted by the powers of the elders to the final death. The Banu Hakim rose to prominence in this time, being hired as mercenaries to take upon perhaps the bloodiest of tasks. Yet this revolt spread through almost every clan known to the world of vampires. The population of vampires across Europe was dwindling fast. Attacks came for the most prominent of Cainites, even reaching the domain of Hardestat of Clan Ventru, who fought off a bold attack, barely escaping with his unlife intact. Something had to be done about these anarchs, and thus plans were set in motion to mitigate the terrors which spilled onto the streets every night. The Sabbat, as you may know, are not discreet when it comes to furthering their goals. Even before the Convention of Thorns, many Sabbat did not abide by the secrecy of survival, of which many vampires abide by to this night. To be a Sabbat is to be proud to be a vampire, to venerate yourself above humanity, yet this comes with a whole host of drawbacks. These attacks against the elders were not subtle. In fact, they were sometimes often presentations of the most horrific displays of vampirism before many terrified mortal onlookers. As such, during the height of the revolt, a plea was sent to the Pope in Rome, demanding for there to be a response from humanity to combat these literal monsters roving about and causing public bloodshed. And thus, the Inquisition was born, devout in sending every Cainite to meet their maker. Befitting of their heretical, demonic status, the tortures of the Inquisition would only hasten the downfall of vampiric society. A vampire during these times not only had to fear the powers of the mortals hunting them from their havens, but also those within their own society, who saw them as traitors or otherwise corrupted in the eyes of the revolt. The elders, quick to save their own vitae, abandoned their children, leaving them to be hunted mercilessly whilst they fled to more secure territories. However, some elders concocted a plan to secure a future for vampire society. Namely, Hardestat the Elder, who had combated both the powers of the Anarchs and the Inquisition alike, vouched for a deal which would return the state of the world back to a position which would provide security and safety for all kindred. These elders wrote an accord, held at the small village of Thorns within England, of which became an agreement for both anarchs and vampires unaligned to the cause to put a ceasefire to the war which waged across their domains. Trapped by both the Inquisition and the powers of the elders, the anarchs and the Banu Hakim had no choice but to agree to this accord. With this came an end to their revolution, and the first anarch movement came to a bitter end. However, not every anarch within the movement would cave in so easily to these demands. The newly established Camarilla provided no remedy to the situation which started the revolt. A society propped up by the manipulations of the elders and the blissful ignorance of the antediluvians provided no safety for many. And so, these bands of anarchs, enraged by this so-called convention, sought to rampage through the village of Thorns, leaving it as a bloody carcass and a constant reminder of their betrayal. The sect that would become known as the Sabbat was not yet unified, had set a course that night through their actions of pure defiance. In the decades that would follow, pacts known as Sabbats would strike at Camarilla strongholds, not only whittling down their populations of mortals by dragging them kicking and screaming into the clutches of the abyss, but by eroding their political foundations. Over 50 years, the Sabbat began to assemble, creating a cohesive ideology and an early doctrine which would cause all kindred that rallied against the Camarilla to agree to a concrete end against the elders and the antediluvians, and to put a conclusive final nail in the coffin of the Camarilla's blind subservience to the ancients' manipulations. By the late 16th century, the Sabbat was a fully fledged sect, yet not without its pitfalls. The sect was organized by a few anarchic elder Cainites, but was vastly populated by great swathes of young neonates and fledglings, of which held very little power or influence to even cause a dent into the behemoth of the ever-growing Camarilla. War between the Sabbat and the Camarilla would continue to wage onwards, however. Whilst the Inquisition continued to claim victory after victory against the forces of the undead, lines were drawn in the sand between the two opposing sides of vampire society. Towns and cities were constantly shifting in vampiric influence, as countries such as Spain, of which held majority numbers of Sabbat, began to see a rise of more Camarilla-aligned communities, whereas ancient strongholds of the Ventrue and Toreador in France began to see a vicious uptick in Sabbat vampires roaming the streets. As such, the battles of this war were not so much a well-orchestrated event, and more so nightly guerrilla raids on each other's territories, kept hidden within alleyways or deserted streets. Puppet rulers constantly fell and turned coat, while science continued to create new weapons for either side, to torch the other's domains like a hearth in midwinter. Within the old world, however, the Camarilla would come out on top. Yet during the age of exploration, a new hope dwindled just on the horizon for the members of the Sabbat. Those younger members of the sect who failed to achieve any foothold in the old world sought greener pastures within the new world, with many Sabbat setting foot upon what would become known as the United States of America. Leaving their old territories, the Sabbat established themselves within the New World in greater numbers. However, not without a plethora of issues. Whilst flourishing initially amongst the growing colonies of mortals, they were considered far weaker due to two main factors. Those mortals who travelled to the New World, many being religious exiles, held an abnormal amount of people who harboured a power known as true faith. True faith is a hurdle many supernaturals within the world of darkness cannot overcome, and thus those devout beings imbued with true faith can not only resist the temptations of vampirism, but can also ward supernatural beings from their communities. Whilst this in itself can be crippling to any new vampire society, within the New World, the Sabbat also had to deal with the absence of the elders from this land. Unable to wage their nightly crusade, it became difficult to maintain the sect's order. Without a goal to achieve, only the looming threat of the immensely powerful werewolves and the occasional rumour of an elder kept them from turning on each other in ravenous mutiny. However, it wouldn't be long until the tendrils of the Camarilla began to reach out to the Americas. And as the Sabbat began to finally plant their foundations within the New World, ships containing Camarilla vampires seeking fortunes in this land began to become a more regular occurrence. disputes. Both factions took to working on how to utilize the instability of this frontier to wage battle against the other. The Sabbat took to leeching upon the Revolutionary War and the French Indian War to utilize the mortal sentiments of conquest and patriotism as a front for their own crusade against the Ivory Tower. The Sabbat also took more extreme measures, akin to the ones utilized within the Old World. They often partook in sieges, exploiting the ever-growing settlements in the New World to drain the mortals, the very feeding stocks of every vampire, breaking the Masquerade at every corner as they did so. However, the sect, despite its efforts to destabilize the Camarilla, constantly faltered due to its main weakness. The Sabbat were not organized. As a group which prided itself upon its freedom and embracing the beast within, it both relished in its ideals and was condemned by them. Civil conflicts within the sect were, and still are, very common. Within the late 18th century, the two main powers of the Sabbat, the Tzimisce and the La Sombra, had begun to turn upon each other, warring over the depleting resources of the New World. Cities were far and few between, and many Sabbat packs took to roaming the wilds desperately, attempting to pick off any would-be settlers on their path. It is said, during this time, the Sabbat began to assimilate with Native American communities, and as such, they began to develop their own set of rituals which drew heavily from the various native communities around the Americas. All the while the Sabbat were preoccupied with their struggles and infighting, the Camarilla had begun to weave themselves into the fabric of the New World, and seemingly overnight to the Sabbat, they had found themselves surrounded. In 30 years, the Camarilla were dominant within the Americas, having unraveled the work the Sabbat had implemented in that short span of time. To quell the fires of the warring clans within the Sabbat, a pact was made in 1803, known as the Purchase Pact. The terms of the pact were simple. Those that were involved in infighting were forsaken by the sect, and were condemned to being hunted by the faction. However, this solution came far too late, and whilst it mended the fragility of the sect, it did not stop the tide of the Ivory Tower from washing further inland. Whilst the Camarilla drove ever west, the Sabbat survived onwards. They set up strongholds in Canada and Mexico, securing their territory and holding out against the rival sect. They launched brutal crusades against the Camarilla cities, from both north and south, to the point the Ivory Tower could only expand in one direction. All the Sabbat needed to do was to maintain its order, and not break under the pressure which was building up on the continent. However, bad blood never tends to settle so easily, and once again, the powers of the Tzimisce and the La Sombra broke out into conflict once more. Blaming one another for their loss of what was now the United States of America, they took to tearing apart their own territories in Mexico and Canada. Mexico itself was ripped apart in open, bloody fashion, with horrific combat taking place in public view. Both clans would not allow any other clan to remain neutral on this conflict, and thus took to swallowing up whole bloodlines to join either side. Within Canada, whilst the conflict was more subtle, the pressure began to build when the Tzimisce soon found out that the La Sombra had been using domains in the country to assemble reinforcements for their battles in Mexico. As the Great War erupted within the mortal world, the vampires within the Americas would begin to see change once more within their own societies. The Camarilla, during the Sabbat civil conflict, had begun to slither northwards, embedding themselves within Canadian cities. Significantly weakened in North America, the Sabbat finally put their differences aside, and gathered in New York, a domain which was tentatively held by the sect against the ever-looming threat of the Ivory Tower. This gathering was not a cordial affair, where the Sword of Caine could lament over their purges of the elders. It was a pursuit to solidify the core beliefs of the sect. The Code of Milan, a text supposedly circulated from the origins of the faction, was given an addenda to put an end to the constant infighting. Originally penned by the former Archbishop of Milan, Gian Galeazzo, it primarily focused on core tenets, such as supporting the head of the Sabbat, the regent, honouring fellow sect members and upholding their rituals, the Auctoritas Ritae. However, these addendums to the code aimed to strike specifically at the issues the Sword of Caine were suffering in their current era. Thus, in 1933, all members of the Sabbat were expected to monitor their peers, call upon a council to resolve interfaction issues, and to act against members of the sect who use their authority to undermine the Sabbat. Perhaps under better circumstances, these addenda to the code would have led to a less turbulent time for the Sword of Caine. However, as always for the Sabbat, this all came a little bit too late. The Third Sabbat Civil War soon arose in 1957, brought upon by the Brujah anti-tribu, who attempted to take over the city of New York from the claws of the Tzimisce and the La Sombra. Whilst the conflict only lasted 100 nights, it saw a wave of violence which caused the final deaths of 2/3 of the Sabbat population within the city. It was at this time that the leader of a new clan, the Pandas, joined forces with the Brujah to threaten the stability of the city even further. Joseph Panda and his band of caitiff anti-tribu were able to force the hand of the Tzimisce and the La Sombra, and thus a diplomatic resolution was met. The Brujah anti-tribu, amongst other clans within the Sabbat, were recognized and given a greater voice than before. Joseph Panda, who had slain the first La Sombra within the conflict, rose to greater prominence within the sect, and the caitiff anti-tribu became a prominent entity, despite the archaic beliefs and superstitions surrounding those without a clan. This, in turn, allowed the Sabbat to avoid a lengthy civil war, of which they had experienced time and time again in the centuries prior. But what can truly be said of the Sabbat in current nights? The Camarilla and the Sabbat are, and have been, constant adversaries in the great game of devouring domains across the globe. However, whilst the Camarilla dominates within most territories, the Sword of Caine are often swift to claim or reclaim cities of which lie tenuously in the grasp of the Ivory Tower. The Sabbat, being composed of mainly younger vampires, against the vast swathes of elders seen within the Camarilla, are able to utilize more cutting-edge tactics and adopt modern stratagems to topple key leaders and even whole regions of controlled domains. However, where the Sabbat seem to thrive the most are within LEDCs, or lower economically developed countries. Here, they tend to build their own little private empires, exploiting the turbulent societies of these areas to create vast feeding stocks for their ravenous soldiers. Here, they can embrace what it means to be a member of the Sabbat, to be a vampire without fear of inquisition, persecution, or the Masquerade. However, while some of the Sword of Caine choose to pursue this existence, many still exist within the sprawling hellscape of industrial cities, predominantly controlled by the Camarilla. Whilst many within the Sabbat reject the Masquerade entirely, most know it would be an unwise decision to provoke the forces of conspiracies, such as the new Second Inquisition, whose technological prowess is able to hunt down a vampire the moment they expose their true nature. Despite this, however, their methods of executing their plans are still much harsher than those of the Camarilla, never shying away from intimidation, torture, or murder. Whilst packs of shovelheads may sprout up within these modern dives of civilization, the Sabbat scarcely thrives under these conditions, and with the Camarilla constantly urging those of vampire kind to be more subtle in their pursuits. Life within the metropolitan world for the Sword of Caine almost feels like a certain final death. Despite the internal conflicts and fissures which often cause the Sword of Caine to be more fragile than many within the sect would prefer, the organised nature of the Sabbat holds true to their ambition of being the army of Caine himself. Whilst the clans most associated with the Sabbat are the Tzimisce and the La Sombra, many anti-tribu clans occupy their ranks. It is, in essence, both a diverse sect, but a sect unified by various shared beliefs, which drastically oppose those held by main branch clans, and the likes of the Camarilla or even the Anarchs. The first Sabbat you may meet within the world of darkness may not even be considered a true Sabbat at all. The Sword of Caine is renowned for a practice known as the mass embrace, a deeply taboo method of raising up great swathes of vampires to act as meager cannon fodder. The victims of these mass embraces are often chosen at random, under the Sabbat's preferred method of shovelheading. As such, the term does what it says on the tin. A shovelhead is often embraced first by their sire, using a very small amount of vitae. Then, before they enter a crazed state known as a frenzy, they are often beaten mercilessly over the head by, well, you guessed it, a shovel. Unconscious, they are then thrown into an open grave, amongst many of their other soon-to-be shovelhead peers, and buried deep enough that their only escape will be to claw their way through the bodies and debris, where they will surface a hollowed-out monster, almost stripped of the shreds of humanity they once held so dear, and ready to carry out their duty as a Sabbat initiate. The duties of this shovelhead at first are quite simple. As they will not have undergone any of the creation rites to become a true Sabbat, they are hastily ushered into a blood bond known as a vinculum with their fellow shovelhead peers, or at least the ones that survived the brutal ordeal prior. The vinculum is formed by a ritual or blood rite known as the Diablerie, a practice which dates back to the Anarch Revolt, used to sever any blood bonds which afflicted a vampire or ghoul prior to taking part in this practice. Each prospective Sabbat will offer an amount of their own vitae into a cup, upon which a ceremony will take place to finalize the process, upon which each member of the newly formed pack will drink and become loosely bonded with their fellow whelps. It is said that the vinculum is perhaps the strongest bond which maintains the structure of the Sabbat, lest it completely implode upon the weight of its members' own diverging monstrous desires and dogmatic beliefs. These shovelheads, however, are only good for one thing: shock troop attacks on their chosen enemy of the week. Primarily bombardments on the Ivory Tower. These vampires scarcely last but a week within the world of darkness, but for those lucky few that prove themselves time and time again, are deemed worthy of creation rites. The writers can differ wildly on which clan the neonate belongs to, their sire, and even which faction within the Sabbat their sire may align with. Altogether, the sire is the one who chooses which writers deems their child worthy of becoming a true Sabbat. Some within the Bruja Antitribu conduct a jumping in type initiation, where the neonate will be beaten mercilessly over a period of time until their sire sees fit to call them a true Sabbat. The Zamishi are more formal with their practice, often conducting ornate ceremonies which venerate the chosen's bloodline and heritage, whereas other clans may conduct horrific tributes or acts of monstrosity upon humanity to confirm the allegiance of the neonate. However, the most symbolic process is the final touch of a flaming brand from a pack priest, often scolded upon a forehead of a new vampire, to symbolize their overcoming of the fear of fire, and their descent into the bestial nature of vampirism. An oath of allegiance will then be said, and that poor whelp which clawed themselves from the earth, shed blood for their sect, will then become a true Sabbat. This newly accepted member will then join their first formal pack, a fairly large group of vampires up to the size of 10, and will participate once again in a Diablerie to confirm their allegiance to their fellow Sabbat. The Sabbat are primarily made up of these true Sabbat pack members, which create the backbone of the Sword of Caine, but much like any army, they do have a strict organization which leads the procession of battle. A ductus is the first rung on the ladder of leadership, which is often obtained by the most efficient combatant or the meanest thug within a chosen pack. They are awarded the title through either merit or ritual combat, i.e. the ritual of monomacy, which awards the title to the ductus. They work very closely with the next position on the rung, the Pack Priest. The Pack Priest, whilst perhaps not the leader of the pack's decisions, fulfills the duty of maintaining and officiating the Sabbat rituals and ceremonies which hold the Sword of Caine together. Thus, the priest is the first title of leadership which typifies the mockery of the clerical titles of the Catholic Church, of which the Sword of Caine utilizes to form their own hierarchy. The Pack Priest is key in maintaining the spiritual commitment of the pack through the rituals of the Sabbat, and some which may be unique to that group alone. If the ductus of the pact is destroyed in combat or leaves the pack, the priest may occupy that role temporarily until the higher power appoints a new leader, or one is autonomously selected by the group. Templars and Paladins are the first set of ranks which leave the pack level of the hierarchy. To become a Templar, you must be publicly renowned for your exceptional martial prowess, and only the best combatants are allowed to become Templars. They are attached as bodyguards to higher ranking members of the Sabbat, primarily bishops and occasionally inquisitors, acting as muscle men to deter weaker vampires from punching far above their height. A Templar can ascend to the rank of Paladin if they have proved themselves worthy enough, being able to join more prestigious retinues which guards the supreme forces of the Sword of Caine, i.e. the archbishops and the cardinals, which require a far greater level of security. These members are not allowed to join the ranks of the Black Hand, an elite group of the sect which sometimes operates separately from the Sabbat and is used in times of greater need for violence. The bishop is the first true leadership title within the Sword of Caine, and are often tasked with overseeing the Sabbat operations within a chosen city. Some bishops have been known to preside over a city, but they are more so used to observe and maintain the Sabbat's influence in a domain, rather than to rule over it. As such, they have been likened to the position of a primogen within the Camarilla, an elder leader which oversees perhaps a singular aspect of unlife within a domain. However, they are often depicted as upholding the spirituality and dogma within their assigned area, and sometimes occupy a role much like a general, organizing packs in their latest sieges and futile strikes. Their primary occupation is to advise the Archbishop, of which occupies the next rung. The Archbishop is perhaps the closest entity the Sabbat has to a prince in the Camarilla. They are the vampires of the Sabbat who have been granted a great expanse of domain, usually in the form of a city, which is theirs to rule and maintain in the name of the Sabbat. However, whilst a prince may be occupied in maintaining the various traditions of the Camarilla, an archbishop does not rule in a similar fashion. An archbishop is tasked with upholding the core beliefs of the Sabbat, primarily its war with the antediluvians. Thus, an archbishop should be seen more as a warlord, which continues the momentum of battle against the Sword of Caine's chosen enemies, and directs the various packs in the direction of fervent, bloody combat. If these soldiers fail to do so, the archbishop may take away the status of initiation from any Sabbat below them. But if some prove themselves through the bloodshed, they may appoint members to a higher station. The position is both an honor and a great danger to the chosen Sabbat vampire who is ordained into it. The war the Sabbat wage is a difficult one. In any city they rule in majority, they will always be overwhelmed by the powers of the mortals, which often outnumber them overwhelmingly. Thus, these cities cannot fall to wreck and ruin, where the forces of Caine rule supremely and the mortals are herded like cattle. The war is fought in defined sequences and stages, a battle of attrition to slowly bring vampire kind to its golden age of rulership. However, for many archbishops, this is a concept scarcely understood, and often leads to impatience or corruption, which then often leads to the final death. The Priscus is the first title which supersedes the city level of leadership. They directly advise the higher echelons of the Sabbat hierarchy. Prisci are often elders or wise ancilla, which are tasked with both guiding the course of the archbishops, but also reporting directly to the cardinals about the affairs on the ground. Prisci are selected for their unique ability to provide vital information in moments of dire need. Often is the case that a battle can be won on a single shred of key advice, and thus a Priscus is often called upon to deliver said knowledge. Many within their life were great warlords or military figures, and have only garnered more skills in their former fields during their embrace into vampirism. The Prisci are known to operate more or less like a board of directors, and their collective intelligence is often utilized by the grander powers of the sect, and used to navigate their next conquest, wherever it may fall. The cardinal is the penultimate leadership role within the Sabbat, and as such carry a significant amount of political weight. Some say the cardinals underline the hypocrisy which often flows through the Sword of Caine. They are typically immensely old, as it is a position almost exclusively reserved for elders. Some have even said that they are closer to the antediluvians than perhaps the entirety of the younger brood within their packs. But as such, they have come with a reputation. Cardinals have often spent multiple lifetimes gathering power, influence, and a great amount of skills to utilize at a moment's need. They manage the global movements of the archbishops, but are also appointed to the consistory, a council of immensely powerful Sabbat who advise the singular ruler of the sect. the Regent. They have all the political powers of those lower than them, able to appoint, demote, and destroy vampires under their rank. They are also able to forge new alliances, or create new enemies, to bolster the Sword of Caine's war machine. There are only 13 cardinals within the Sabbat, and each are selected for their overwhelming efficiency, and their unique ability to steer the sect in the right direction. The Regent is the supreme authority over the Sabbat. However, it is widely understood that whilst the Regent presides over the Sabbat, they are merely keeping the seat warm for the Dark Father, Caine, so he can lead the army when he returns. The Regent has all of the political powers of the ranks lower than them. They are tasked with ensuring that the Sabbat is forthright in taking its holy war straight to the antediluvians themselves, and Regents past have embarked upon great crusades across the globe. The historic seat of power for the Regent was Mexico City, and many Sabbat have been made and broken by the title of this ultimate authority. What can be defined as the ecclesiarchy of the Sabbat is both what secures the sect and maintains their strength, but also divides its members and fractures those that do not accept its instances of hypocrisy. Many younger brood do not accept the power of the Regent, or even the authority of the cardinals, seeing it as a direct infringement upon their crusade against the elder vampires. However, what unifies the sect more than anything are the rituals and ceremonies which are venerated highly within their sect. The 13 Auctoritas Ritae are rituals which are mandatory for all Sabbat members to participate within. There are a number of other rituals which are non-compulsory, but these 13 are what maintain the Sabbat's strength, and ultimately the order of which they struggle to uphold. Here are the 13 Auctoritas Ritae, in brief summary, to give you a glimpse into what monstrosities a Sabbat member must indulge to simply keep their status as a true Sabbat. The Binding is a ritual in which all Sabbat members, from recruits to high-ranking officials, swear allegiance to the Sword of Caine. It is a formal oath of fealty which unifies the sect's members and reinforces their commitment to the Sabbat's goals. The Ritus formally concludes with a Vaulderie, in the effort to take the secrets upon which the members of the Binding indulge will take to the final death. The Bloodbath is a ritual performed to recognize a Sabbat vampire's claim to a title, such as a bishop or a cardinal. It formalizes the vampire's new status within the sect, and other Sabbat members contribute blood to a large vessel as a sign of allegiance. As such, the newly ordained member will then bathe within this vessel, symbolizing the acceptance of this new title. As a gesture, the Sabbat members will then drink from it, accepting the new leader fully. A blood feast is a ritual meal where captured mortals or rogue vampires are suspended in chains at head height and fed upon by Sabbat members. This ritual is usually conjoined to other ceremonies, as most Sabbat events are completed or started with a blood feast. There is usually one victim for every 3 Sabbat members in attendance, and thus for larger congregations, these feasts can often turn into a massacre. Creation rites, as stated prior, are rituals which mark the passage of a new vampire into a true Sabbat. They include an oath of allegiance and often involve unique ceremonies depending on the sire's preferences. Festivo Deo Estinto, or the Festival of the Dead, is a week-long celebration in March where all Sabbat in a city come together to revel in their vampiric nature. It culminates in a blood feast and various other activities that emphasize vampiric prowess and rulership. During the festivities, there will often be reenactments from the Book of Nod, whilst the senior leaders, such as the bishops and higher, will delight younger members in their bloodied pursuits during their unlife. The fire dance serves as a way for Sabbat members to master their Rotrek, or their fear of fire. A priest will light a large bonfire away from the prying eyes of mortals, and to the beating of a drum, Sabbat members will dance around the flames, entering a near trance-like frenzied state. As the ritual comes to an end, it culminates in great chanting, goading members to jump through the flames, in an array of death-defying leaps of bravery or perhaps madness. Games of instinct are sanctioned games and competitions among Sabbat members that vary in form and style. Amongst other things, they maintain the predatory edge of the sect. These can vary from wild car chases in flaming vehicles, or even capturing and tagging werewolves with cattle rancher-style tags. Monomacy is a ritualized combat to the death, used to settle disputes within the Sabbat. It is typically conducted by higher-ranking taking members, and can involve various rules and conditions. These may include a no-holds-barred style of combat, where all disciplines and weapons are allowed, or they may restrict various abilities available to the vampire. The Pala Grande is a major Sabbat event held on All Hallows Eve, featuring a grand masquerade ball. It involves reenactments of historical events and, of course, a very large blood feast. Sermons of Caine are where Sabbat members gather to hear sermons based on passages from the Book of Nod, the vampiric holy text, reinforcing not only their history, but their ideology and dogmatic beliefs. The Vampiric is a bonding ritual that creates strong emotional ties among Sabbat members, and is mandatory for all members of the Sword of Caine, lest they wish to be excommunicated or at worst destroyed. War parties are formed to hunt and kill non-Sabbat elders, and they involve multiple packs competing to diablerize the elder. This event can cause great devastation to the surrounding area in which it is conducted. Sabbat packs will often eviscerate and torch anything and anyone which comes before them and their prized target. The winning pack gains status within the Sabbat, and depending upon the notoriety of the elder targeted, this can result in permanent accolades. The Wild Hunt is called upon when a Sabbat member betrays the sect by revealing its secrets to outsiders. The traitor is subjected to torment and then execution, and anyone who learned of the betrayal is also hunted down. The Sword of Caine is renowned for its nature of embracing what it truly means to be a vampire within the world of darkness. Whilst they may pursue a crusade which seems futile to most who know about the dark history of this world, their zeal to destroy the powers that be is unmatched. Whether you revere them as the antagonists of vampiric society or its saviors, the Sabbat are truly in a league of their own. Whilst they may not match the Camarilla in their numbers or domains, none can undermine their commitment to their goals. Yet, if you were to meet eyes with even one of these unhallowed fiends, perhaps you'd best pray they were carrying a shovel, rather than an ambition to have you turn into the next centerpiece in a mighty feast for your blood. Thank you for watching. I say this every time, but this took a very long time to script and record and to eventually edit. And to be honest, I was ill for a good amount of this, but also I was on holiday, and then we had the Jeanette video, which there are a couple of road bumps in the way, let's just say. So I'm very glad this is out now, and it's obviously a pleasure to see all the support recently, even though we did have that slight sort of dip with the last video, which, you know, does happen. This is YouTube. Stuff like this happens. But I hope you enjoyed this installment. I wasn't able to cover absolutely everything, but having used a fair few older sources, primarily A Guide to the Sabbat, which is, I think, is an amazing book. I really hope this was enough to sort of satiate your appetite, so to speak. But until next time, stay safe and do not wander naively into the night.